Hello, I wanted to make a video for my friends and also for the sake of me remembering of my best and worst books of the year, plus some honorable mentions for the best one. So we're gonna do best, honorable mentions, worst. My credentials: I read 279 books this year, and I DNF'd, or I didn't finish 14 more. Often I get the question, how do I read so much? I don't know. It's my hobby. I mind my own business. I don't, I have trouble watching, like, TV and stuff. Like, I can't focus on that, so books is usually what I do for entertainment. I read a mix of physical copies, ebooks, and audiobooks. When I'm showing you the books, I don't have most of them with me right now, but if I do, I'll show them, and if not, I'll put a picture so you know what they look like. Mix of genres, mostly fiction. I do read nonfiction sometimes, but within fiction, definitely a little bit of everything. Within nonfiction, mostly science and memoir. I don't venture out that much, but I read mostly science fiction, fantasy, but also plenty of general fiction, literary, some mystery thriller, not really my area, etc., etc. I have a little bit of everything on this list. My ratings are based on my experience of reading, and not, like, how good I think the book is, or, like, how much I think in general people should read it. I know some people rate, like, how important is this book to have or something. No, this is, like, sheer, like, enjoyment. And also every book might be 5 stars for a different reason. They're not all being graded on the same scale. So keep in mind that if I give something 5 stars, that doesn't mean I think that everyone will give it 5 stars, or even that everyone will like it. There's a lot of books I give 5 stars that I give 5 stars knowing, like, most people will not enjoy this. This is just a very specific, like, hit the mark for me personally. Ratings sometimes change after I read it, so if you see me give a book 5 stars, 4 stars here, or something that I gave a different rating months ago, or vice versa, you see a book I gave 5 stars not be on the list. Some books you really like when you read it, and it doesn't stick with you at all. Other books you like when you read, but you don't love, and then you think about it for, like, 3 months afterwards. So that changes ratings for me. This is just, at the end of the year, what stuck. If you liked a book that I like, and I love, please tell me about it. We can talk about it. I'd love to. If you hated a book that I love, I'm protecting my peace. Please don't tell me. Like, I wanna live my best life, okay? Vice versa, if in the worst books I say I hated or did not enjoy a book that you love, I'll tell you what they are. Skip over that part. I'm planning on putting timestamps on this video. It's going to be very long, or there will be in the description of the video timestamps of all the books, so you can see, or if you want to skip to different parts or something, that will all be there. Protect your peace. And I'm always looking for more recommendations. I mean, if you see, like, books on this list and you're like, oh, I think you'd really like this other thing, or even if you see a book that I didn't like or did not finish, which there's some of the ones in the least favorite are books that I didn't finish, and you really think I should give it a second chance for some reason, you can try to convince me. I'm up for that. But I'm always looking for recommendations, so I'd love to hear what people are thinking. I'm, like, dodging this, like, lighting thing. Fun fact, this is my second time filming this. I filmed this entire video, and most of the files were corrupted, so we're redoing all of it. But that's fine. Let's get on to the actual books. First up, we have The Monster of Elendhaven by Jennifer Geisbrecht. It's like a Gothic horror novella, and it takes place in this town called Elendhaven. Just very, like, grimy and Gothic and atmospheric and kind of gross. It follows Johan, who's a monster who just came out of the sea and pretends to be human, like, looks like human, and, like, kills people and, like, eats people and shit, and it's just kind of generally gross. This isn't, like, the monster's actually, like, a nice person. Like, he's a bad person. Like, and he's not a person, but he's also, like, he sucks. And he stumbles across a young rich man who is also a sorcerer, who is also a bad person. named Florian, and they have a little fucked up murder romance. I don't know. This is a lot of fun in my opinion. I had some friends read it and they did like it, but they were like, wow, that was gross. Yeah, no, the horror element is definitely there. I don't really think of it as a horror that much, but it totally is, so be aware. But it is also just like a fun, fucked up little romance for, I think if you like Hannibal, like NBC Hannibal, or the like murder husbands trope, just like kind of toxic gay murder relationship, I think this will really suit you. I love this book. I think it's so much fun. I mean, it's a novella. It won't waste your time. You can finish it in a few sittings, and it is just like atmospheric and gross and kind of weirdly enjoyable. I don't know, but yeah. Short review. It's a short book. Highly recommend. Okay, next up we have The Bedlam Stacks by Natasha Pulley. Oh, this book. This was the year of Natasha Pulley. I mean, it was actually the year of a few authors that we will get to, but she was one of them. I think I've read all of her books now, including her new one. I got an early copy. This is a weird book in many ways, but one thing is that it's like a 1.5 book in a series in the Watchmaker of Filigree Street series, which I have both of those books here, and they're fantastic. It's an amazing series. This takes place in the same world at like the same time with like different characters, so you don't have to read the series to read this. I recommend that you do. You also don't have to read this in between the other two. There's like a little cameo, but it's not central to it. This is historical fantasy, but like very light on the fantasy, heavy on the historical, about, okay, this is hard to explain. So malaria was a big problem. This is like late 1800s. Takes place first in like the UK, but they go to Peru. Malaria was a huge problem. In Peru, there was like the government, but also like gangs were keeping like real lock on these quinine trees, which were a type of tree that the cure for malaria was, or not cure, but like treatment for malaria was derived from. So the government was like, if we have control of the market, if we have a monopoly, everyone who really needs malaria cures will go to us. So they were really like trying to keep people from smuggling out quinine trees. Our main character is trying to smuggle out quinine trees. So he goes to Peru, and he gets this guide who is like he's like a local in Peru, but he's also like a recently converted Catholic priest. The priest leads him to this village way up in the mountains, high elevation, that's filled with disabled people. Disabled in all different ways. And there are mysteries afoot. And this priest is not a very good Catholic priest. He kind of seems a little off. It's so weird, and also Natasha Pulley has a very specific brand of like fantasy elements that are just beautiful. It feels like reading Narnia as a kid, like coming in from the cold into like a magic watch store. You know, it's just like that vibe. This one's really atmospheric. Like I love the other two books in the series. This one though, I don't know, hit different for me. I would say tentatively put the whole series in favorites, but a lot happens in those books. So we're just gonna talk about this one. It's beautiful. There's a little bit of a romance, like queer romance, but it's kind of like you can see it or you can't. Like it doesn't it's not a central part of the plot. It's hardly even there, really. Don't go in looking for a romance, because that's not really what it's about. But it also, like, I love her historical books always, like, reveal really interesting parts of history that I just didn't know that much about, and, like, finding out about how they smuggled quinine trees was just really interesting. So I highly recommend. Beautiful, beautiful book. Such a strange concept, and really not what you expect from, like, the title and stuff. I didn't really know what I was getting in for going in, but... Next is a book that I also don't have with me because someone is borrowing it, and that is Beartown by Frederick Backman. This was also the year of Frederick Backman. I think I read, like, 7 of his books. I've read all of his full-length novels except, I think, for like Brit Marie Was Here or something, including the new one. Again, I got an early copy. If you are on like literature or like sad book TikTok, then you might have heard of this. I picked it up because it was a recommendation from a YouTuber I really like. It is a kind of general, maybe literary, but not really, like general fiction, contemporary general fiction book about a town called Beartown. And Beartown likes hockey. They once had a very successful hockey team, and now they've kind of fallen from grace, I guess. And you follow, it's an ensemble cast, you really follow a lot of characters, and also there's some like one-offs, characters from around the town who you get the perspective of. So it's really a story about the entire town, but it's mainly about Maya. Maya is the daughter of the hockey like team's like manager, I think. Kevin is like the star player. Benji is another player on the team. He's Kevin's best friend. Also Fizzy, who's Maya's best friend. You get perspectives from Maya's father, Maya's mother, Benji's family, Kevin's family. It's very all-encompassing, and it's a really heartbreaking book. My copy is covered in tear stains, I'm not gonna lie, but I think it's beautiful. I really like Frederick Backman. Has a very specific writing style that I do not think will work for everyone, but like I could pick it out from a crowd. It's very particular. I love it. I love how it has such like drama and how lines that are repeated kind of change meaning over the course of the book. But this is kind of a story about like a tragedy and how a town responds to that, especially when it relates to toxic masculinity and kind of sports culture and in groups and out groups and money and funding. It ties like all these social aspects together in a really interesting way. Don't be scared if you don't know anything about hockey. I don't know anything about hockey. I don't think any hockey actually happens like on page. That's really not. It's about the team. It's not really about the sport. It's about the win. It's about the success. It's about the rivalries. It's about the kinship. You know, all that stuff. It's a very emotional book. I think it's uplifting. Some people think it's depressing. Maybe check trigger warnings if you're the kind of person who needs that or does that. But I kind of recommend going in blind, tentatively. So, yeah, that's Beartown by Frederick Backman. Another book that I've loaned out, we have Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. Again, this is the year of John Scalzi. He was my most read author. I think I read 11 of his books or something like that. Something crazy. I love him. I read this, and I really needed this when I read it. It's the first one I read of his, and also is like still my favorite. It's about a guy who, during the pandemic, loses his job because of the pandemic, and he's looking for a job, and he runs into like an old friend from like college or something, who is like, I have a job for you, but I can't tell you anything about it. And this is not a spoiler, but the job turns out to be, he's like kind of a custodian, but like helping out at a like kaiju nature preserve. If you don't know what a kaiju is, because you're not a massive nerd, kaiju, like Godzilla, that's like a kaiju. He is one of the species of kaiju. So they're like massive scale creatures. John Scalzi is one of the few authors that can make me like truly like laugh out loud while reading. It's not usually something I do. There's like two kaiju who are mating. They're like a mating pair, and the like millennial staff named them Edward and Bella. And I was like, oh my god, I can't do this. I really recommend like almost any of John Scalzi's books. I think he's done a few genres as well, like the Dispatcher series are like mystery novellas. Those are all really good. He has a short story anthology coming out this year that I did not get an early copy of. They denied me, but love him. Red Shirts is another favorite. Yeah, you really can't go wrong. But Kaiju Preservation Society, it's a one-off. I think it's like 300. It might be a little under 300 pages. Pretty quick read. And it's just pure fun. So yeah, highly recommend. If you need a break from school and you're like dying, this will make you feel better. I read this during senior year when I was like my insomnia was really bad and I was like fighting for my life. It's a good thing to comfort you and calm you down. This one I do have a copy of, and this is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. This is the rare case of me really enjoying a super hyped book. Not that I usually dislike them, but I usually I'm like, oh, okay, that was fine. But this one was really good. I will say this one didn't super stick with me, but I enjoyed it so much when I was reading that I'm still going to keep it on the best of list. I do like V.E. Schwab. I've read her books before. I still need to finish Vicious, but I think she's writing a third book, so I feel like I should put it off. Although I read her Darker Shade of Magic series and didn't really fuck with that. But I feel like this is her writing at its finest. It's also a standalone, which works surprisingly well. She has another standalone, I think, coming out this year. This is a historical and contemporary fantasy. It's over a long stretch about a girl named Addie Larue, who's originally lives in France in like the 1600s, something like that. I might be totally wrong. Don't fact check me. That's probably incorrect. And she's being forced into a marriage, and she makes a deal with, like, the devil. Like, it's like the forest demon, but it's like the devil, to live forever. And the devil's like, okay, you're gonna get sick of it. It's gonna suck. And once you give up, you can give me your soul. So I'll wait for you to give up. And Addie's like, I'm not gonna give up. One condition of her immortality is that no one can remember her. Like, once she steps out of someone's eye line, they forget she ever existed. So she just, like, steals stuff and just can walk out, and it doesn't matter, stuff like that. There are some benefits, but mostly she can't form any lasting relationship because no one remembers her. Until, one day, modern era, she tries to steal a book from a bookstore, and the owner remembers her. What's going on with that? I love this. It was so, like, for one thing, it's one of those books where the main character really loves books, and I always appreciate that. The devil also, like, they kind of have, like, a romantic thing for a while, and I'm like, that's real. Me too. That's also what would happen. And also, like, the actual love interest of this he's very interesting. I like how their dynamic works. I don't want to spoil anything, but they fit together very well, I'll say that. Plus, when it's going through, like, her history of living in years, again, there's some, like, interesting historical stuff. And also just anything about, like, how much it would suck to live forever. I'm like, yeah, that's real, because I don't want to live forever. So, yeah, that's Invisible Life of Addie Larue. Highly, highly recommend. Very fun. Lived up to the hype, for me personally. I actually just got a copy of this, because it was one of the last books I read this year. I Would Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, or at least one of the last, like, best ones of the year. This, for one thing, look at how tiny this is. This book is so crazy. I'm not going to try to put in a genre. You might have seen this on TikTok. It's actually quite an old book. I think it's from, like, the 90s. That's gotten, like, a second life because of the internet. It's about a girl who lives in a cage with 39 other women. All the other women are adults, and she's, like, a child. All the other women remember life before being put in the cage. The kid only remembers life in the cage. And also all the women who remember life before, they don't remember being put into the cage, and none of them know why they're there. Like, they're not like, oh, we're all spies, that's why we're being kept here. No one knows, like, why they're there. They're not allowed to touch. There are guards that pace, like, up and down. And they are men, but they never interact with the woman. They don't, like, look at them. They don't talk to them. Ever. But they will, like, whip them if they, like, break rules. And without spoilers, one day something happens. And their whole situation changes. This is extremely bleak, insanely intriguing, and will not answer most of the questions that it poses. I had another book on this list in the honorable mentions I'll bring up again, where there's something about a book that is very unsatisfying, but is so intriguing the whole time that makes it, like, satisfying. Like, the whole time I was so into, like, finding out what happened that it didn't even matter that I didn't find out what happened. I was so engaged anyway. But it has, like, really interesting reflections on identity, generally, like, how identity exists when it's not in relation to something else, what makes the main character a woman if she's never interacted with a man? What makes her a human if she has no memory of the world before the cage? Does that make her this new thing? But I thought it was really, like, interesting, beautiful. I read it in, like, 2 sittings or something. It was so... It's crazy. It is quite bleak. It's pretty depressing. It's quite gory at times. Some people put it under horror. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but definitely, like, kind of dystopian vibes. Not really, but kind of. Really thought-provoking. Super good. Highly recommend. Absolute banger. This next one, I don't have a copy of because my copy is on its way, but it is Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. This I read an early copy of. It had previously been indie published, but Del Rey, which is a publisher, picked it up. It's probably, like, the best book I've ever read that I got an early copy of. Like, I was gobsmacked. It was so good. It's a fantasy standalone, like, epic / dark fantasy standalone. Dark academia, but not in, like, a secret history kind of way, and just, like, a general criticism, and it takes place in an academic setting. This is going to be hard to explain. Bear with me. It follows 2 main characters. I don't know if it's Tamil or Thamil. It's spelled with a TH. I'm going to say Tamil, tentatively. He is kind of an immigrant to the Brighthaven, the city. The city has a name, but they call it, like, the Brighthaven. There's, like, a dome over it. He's an immigrant in there from a tribe outside. Outside of the city, which has, like, a magic dome over it, there's this thing called the Blight, which is just, like, randomly appears and, like, kills people. And the closer you get to the city, the, like, worse it is just around the border. So crossing into the city is extremely dangerous, but his tribe was already, like, so depleted that they decided to risk it. They were down to 30, and crossing into the city, only he and his niece survived the passage in. So they're the only ones left of their tribe. So he's a part of this, like, immigrant class in the city. The other character, Siona, is, she belongs to the city of Brighthaven, but she's the first woman to ascend to, like, the status of high mage. So she becomes, like, a formal, like, academic at the, like, academic institution that studies this thing called, like, sourcing and siphoning. So basically the magic system in this, all of the, like, magic that runs the city, and especially that powers the dome that keeps them safe, is, like, done via collecting, siphoning energy from this other realm. So this academic institution just studies how to siphon better and more efficiently, and how to find new sources of power and stuff to best run the city. This book is fucking crazy. It's unbelievably dark. It covers so many areas of, like, commentary, and does them all, like, in my opinion, extremely well. Covers, like, immigration politics, intersectionality, women in academia, generally, like, mistreatment and elitism in academia, race, class, the divide between the two, just a fuck ton of shit. It, like, a rebellion, like, the politics of rebellion and violent uprising. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's insane. Has some of the best twists that I've just, like, ever read. I have some trouble with twists, because if I know that I'm reading a book that has a twist, like any mystery novel, then it doesn't really matter what the twist is. I'm just rarely surprised because I knew there was going to be a twist. I didn't know. I wasn't expecting anything here. And I was like, I had to, like, get up and walk around. I had to do laps because I was so shocked by this book. It's just wild. It has a fantastic magic system. It's really crazy. I think this is probably some of the best, like, dark academia in terms of academic criticism, how elitism and also, like, more systematic discrimination towards other groups outside of class really impact, like, our knowledge base and how we get information, and who that information is for. Crazy. crazy, so good. Probably the best standalone fantasy novel I've ever read. There's a lot of fantasy series for a reason. It's hard to make a standalone fantasy that is good. It's quite long. It's like 600 pages. I'm planning to read the author's other book, which is indie published, The Sword of Kagan, soon. Kagan. But Blood Over Brighthaven, I can fully say, like, if you're... it's not a beginner level fantasy. I'd say maybe if you're already a fantasy fan, this will knock you off your feet. It was great. Highly recommend. So good. I'm so excited for my copy to come. It's a special edition. It's going to be beautiful. I have a copy of this one, 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. No one is more surprised than me that I have a contemporary romance book on my favorites list. I do like contemporary romance. Like, I read it, usually because my friends like it, and I want to like what they're liking. But it's never, like, stand out. This is a romance book for me, which means that it's both extremely funny and also, like, horribly angsty and depressing. And also doesn't follow, like, the standard structure of a romance book, which is good because I don't like that format. I read another book that defies that format recently that I read it this year, so I can't talk about it, but another time I will tell you about that book. 7 Days in June. This follows Eva Mercy, who is a, like, paranormal vampire romance author, and also Shane Hall is, like, he's kind of a recluse and, like, a very celebrated literary author, like, has, like, a lot of awards and stuff, but he doesn't, like, do public appearances a lot, and they meet in the modern day at, like, a book panel that Shane kind of mysteriously shows up to. He's not expected to. It's about, like, Black authors. They are like, hey, except they met before, several years earlier, when they were teenagers and both very, like, troubled people. They spent 1 week as teenagers just crazy in love, and then were separated for many, many years. This book is beautiful. It's, as I said, hilarious. If you need a reason to read this, just read, like, look up a sample or something, and just read, like, the first few lines. Because it starts on a really funny note. It gets quite angsty. That when you go back, kind of flash back to their time together as teenagers, there's some trauma shit going on. It's very hard to read at times. You really feel their romance. Like, they feel like real people. Although, I've read also Tia Williams' more recent book, A Love Song for Ricky Wilde, and her, like, humor, it's like this, like, weird surrealist goofiness. Like, I don't know how, because it's not realistic at all, but it does make them feel, like, more real to me. And it's very romantic, obviously. Eva Mercy has a daughter. She's a single mother. The daughter is hilarious. I think Tia Williams' next book is a YA romance following her daughter in this. So, you have to obviously read this before you read that. You probably don't, but in my heart you do, because this book is amazing. If you are a romance reader, I think you'll like this. Even if you're not, like me, that's not really your vibe usually, I think this might change your mind, or at least this will be kind of an exception, because it's not romance like you normally expect romance to be. But yeah, it's really good. I like it better than her other book, Love Song for Ricky Wilde, but I just think Tia Williams is an excellent writer. She really blends all those emotions really well. So yeah, 7 Days in June. I don't have a copy of this one, because it came out, like, 4 days ago. This is The Favorites by Lane Fargo. I read an early copy of this, which I felt so lucky, because this was fantastic. It is I would say, contemporary drama. I think it's, if you really like Taylor Jenkins Reid, it's kind of books of, like, following rich people, and then it's also kind of done multimedia style. You'll like this a lot. Follows two ice skaters, Heath and Katarina. It's also a Wuthering Heights retelling, which I fully did not realize the entire book. My bad. I've read Wuthering Heights too, so it's extra funny. And they're ice skaters, and you see them kind of grow up and improve. Katarina is extremely ambitious. Heath, less so at first, but he really loves her, so he's kind of doing it for her. You see their childhoods, you see their kind of blooming romance, And then when they enter the competitive sphere, there's just TTT. They get involved with this other pair who are siblings, and that introduces a bunch of drama. It's so like, if you live for the tea, for the gossip, you're gonna eat this shit up. This is everything I wanted it to be when I heard ice skater romance. Because that world, competitive ice skating, it's crazy. All the people there are insane. It's kind of like the Queen's Gambit-y vibes, where it's like the highs and lows of like extreme competitive sport. Yeah, it's really good. I loved it. There's also this cool thing where like in between chapters of Katarina's point of view, there's like these little sections that are done like a documentary. It's kind of hard to explain what I mean by that, but like they have other characters putting their inputs in, and it's like it's written like a documentary. I don't know how to say it. Just read the book, you'll find out. Also, if you're an audiobook girly, I did not listen to the audiobook, but it's a full cast audiobook. So that means that like all the characters have different actors, and it's like a whole production. So if you do like audiobooks, I think this will be a very good book to listen on audiobook. I might reread it just so that I can listen to the audiobook. Amazing. I think really like one of the standout releases for the beginning of this year, and can't recommend it enough. I think people will really like this book. I feel like it's also very like universally appealing to a lot of people. It's not really a romance, I will say that. Like, there is a romance aspect, but don't go in expecting a romance. That's like only one part of the plot, and it's kind of a different romance. It's there's different aspects of it that it's not your standard thing. That is The Favorites by Lane Fargo. So good. We're in the final stretch of Best Of. We have like 3 more. This is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This was the only Becky Chambers book that I hadn't read. I've read all of their other ones. It's a novella. And I get tangled in this. I'm like, I don't even know how much I love this book, or if I was just so happy to come back to Becky Chambers, because she really is like one of the best science fiction authors. I mean, generally, I would say her books are more like lighthearted. The Wayfinder series and also Monk and Robot are both, they have dark emotional moments and stuff, but I would say generally as far as sci-fi goes, they're kind of like low sci-fi, like chiller. This one's a little darker, honestly. It follows a team of like bio researchers, and they're on like essentially a lifelong mission. Like, we've gotten to the point where we can go between planets, but not like quickly. So Earth sends out these missions of people who are sent to go for like 30-40 years, and over that time they'll go to like 5 to 8 planets or something that are marked as having like life, to investigate them, see what's there, catalog the nature, see if it's fit for humanity. So they like spend like a year or 2 at each planet and spend all the other time like just traveling in between. And this is pretty grim. It like finishes on quite a dark note. But if you're like a bio nerd, I'm not really, but if you are, you're gonna eat this up, because it's like talking about the intricacies of trying to describe and catalog biological landscapes in space, which is a big problem because we don't know that we probably know that other planets' life will not operate on the same like phylums and stuff that we have here, and can pose, unique dangers. There's a part in here where they get stuck on a planet for like a long time that was harrowing as fuck. I was like, oh my god. And again, this is a novella. This is like an afternoon. Come on, it's like 140 something pages. Also, Becky Chambers always writes like really great characters. I love all of her characters. These guys are kind of a family. She does a lot of found families. A lot of queer rep generally in her books. I don't remember specifically in this. I think yes. I mean, almost certainly someone, but I don't remember exactly what it is. To Be Taught If Fortunate. Really, really surprisingly beautiful. Like, dark, beautiful, kind of uplifting in a weird way. So good, so good, so worth your time considering how big this is. Read any Becky Chambers, any of it. If you're new to sci-fi, fantastic place to start. Her or John Scalzi are wonderful places to start. I really need a copy of this, but I haven't gotten one. A Bone in His Teeth by Kellen Graves. This is a no judgment zone. This is a romance, primarily, between a trans man lighthouse keeper and a, siren, a merman. And it is smutty, but I love Kellen Graves. I've read all of their books. The Prince of the Sorrows series is one of my favorites. I have copied, special editions of the whole series on the way right now, and the 4th book is coming out. I'm so excited. I didn't love their other standalone, the Fox and the something. I don't remember. It was good, but it wasn't, amazing. This was amazing. This was a banger. I'm definitely not opposed to, explicit romance books, and I did enjoy that part of this book, but also it's just, even just the plot, the actual plot of this is actually really great. It's kind of a mystery, which, again, not my thing, but super good. It's kind of, this lighthouse, he's just a guy. He's trying to escape kind of his life, and he sees a job for a lighthouse keeper, and he's like, oh, no one will bother me. And he goes to this town, and it's kind of a weird place. It's just strange. He's getting kind of weird vibes, but he becomes the lighthouse keeper, and they don't know what happened to the last lighthouse keeper, I think. And then he thinks maybe this place is haunted because there's weird shit going on. Eventually finds out that it is the local siren, the local merman. But it's really sweet. I don't know. I think Kellen Graves is just a fantastic writer. It's indie. All of their books are indie, and I fucking please support them. I think I got an early copy of this, but I still buy all of their books because I want to support them, and I know that publishing is hard, and they're deeply putting out some better quality books than a lot of stuff that's being traditionally published. So either Prince of the Sorrows, which is Cruel Prince but gay and a lot darker, and also has smut, or this book. So good. Such a good time. Highly recommend. The smut's good. The mystery's good. I love the characters. There's disability rep in this, and also the Prince of the Sorrows. Prince of the Sorrows, also, that whole series has tons of representation of queer characters, mental and physical disabilities. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I love angst, so these are always up my alley. They're quite angsty. Yeah, A Bone in His Teeth. Okay, I also don't have a copy of this one. This one was a surprise. This is The Ministry of Time by Kaylee Ann Bradley. And this was a surprise because it falls under, if you look at a lot of books, you might have seen these kinds of books that get a really big kind of press release that end up on a lot of lists, and publishers advertise them a lot, and you see them just a lot of places, but the reviews turn out to be fairly low, usually in the 3.5 range, which doesn't sound that low, but if on Goodreads reviews are really inflated, so usually below a 3.5 on Goodreads, I'm there's probably something wrong with this book. This one's around that range. It's quite low, but I loved it. I think it's maybe mismarketed, but okay, so it's called The Ministry of Time, and it's about, in Britain, they have acquired or created, unclear, a time machine, a way of traveling through time, and they make a kind of secret ministry to explore how this works. And for one of their first kind of experiments, they find people throughout history who disappeared or maybe died under mysterious circumstances, so that they can pull them out just before their deaths or their disappearances, and it won't change history because they were going to die anyway. And they bring them to the present, and they assign them bridges, which are people who work for the Ministry of Time from present day, who have to teach them about what the present day is like and get them accustomed to living in modern era. So the main character is one of these bridges, and she's assigned this guy who I think he's from like early to mid 1800s, and he worked on a exploration, like colonizer ship, and he's brought through and has to get attuned to normal life. And I just really like this because it's mostly just like kind of domestic scenes of him learning what the world is like, and also like learning to change a lot of his views. He's he's from the 18th. Some people say about people now, they're like, it was a different time, and they mean like 2012. It was actually a different time. It was the 1850s, and he was a part of like the colonizer machine. He wasn't high up, he was kind of a henchman, but he holds a lot of like outdated ideas. And it's also kind of made more interesting by the fact that the bridge, the main character, she's white passing, but she's actually mixed race. So she kind of fields some like complicated stuff and has to teach him not to be racist, which I know is kind of a trope that people don't like, of like especially a female main character having to teach the male main character to like be a good person. But like he genuinely shows like an interest in becoming better and developing and becoming attuned to the world, and works out of like best intention, like actually. And there's just a lot of like very sweet moments of them together, kind of learning from each other, and also him like discovering Spotify and like bursting out crying because the idea of like music on demand is just never something he could have imagined. And it's really sweet. There is like honestly the part of the book that I enjoy most are just like kind of the character and relationship studies. There's a romance aspect, it's not a big thing, where it's very slow paced. It kind of speeds up at the end, and they add in a bunch of other stuff that I think was like kind of unnecessary, but I enjoyed those character building moments so much that it was really a standout for me because of that. I do recommend it if you're a very character focused reader and you really think this is kind of an interesting concept and you just want to see a lot of like someone learning about the world for the first time, relearning about the world for the first time, and kind of facing their misconceptions and preconceptions of each other, really. They both kind of have some learning to do together. It was really sweet. They have a special place in my heart. That is the end of the best of, so we're going to move to the honorable mentions after I take a break. Starting off, honorable mentions. These are books that I liked. They're not like new favorites, but for some reason they stood out to me and I want to talk about them. I think they're worth reading. Starting off with the Dreamer Trilogy by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a sequel trilogy to the Raven Cycle, which is one of my favorites of all time. I have special edition right there. And this follows Ronan from the original series as he continues to be crazy. And also Adam, and also Ronan's brothers. This review, I will say, slight spoilers for the Raven Boys, because it's kind of impossible to talk about the Dreamer Trilogy without spoiling some of the stuff from the Raven Boys. Anyway, this it follows Ronan's continuation with his powers, which he can pull things out of his dreams. He can pull things out willingly, like he can dream something up and then try to pull it out. He also can sometimes pull out things that he didn't mean to dream about and didn't mean to pull out. There's a really funny scene in the series from like the first book where he is staying with Adam at Adam's dorm room in Harvard, because our baby got in Harvard, and he's like sleeping there and he wakes up and he's accidentally pulled through a whole bunch of like human eating crabs, like crabs, and they have to like fight them off and like kill all of them, and they cause such massive damage to the dorm room that they have to lie and say that Ronan was drunk, and Harvard bans him from the entire Harvard campus. And I think that's really funny. And he meets up with another dreamer named Hennessy, and she's made a bunch of clones of herself. And also this guy, Bride, and they have a little eco-terrorism road trip. It's the only way I can describe it. And it's a fun time. The third book is very emotional. I cried a lot. But also just the experience of rereading the Raven Cycle and then reading these. It was very special to me. Even if this will just never live up to the original series. Don't just read the Dreamer Trilogy. Definitely read the Raven Cycle, then maybe read the Dreamer Trilogy if you really love Ronin like I do. But read the Raven Cycle. So good. Didn't read it this year. Didn't originally read it this year. I reread it this year, but can't go on this list. Love that series. One of my all-time favorites. So yeah. Dreamer Trilogy was nice going back to those characters. Next, my copy's also at home. The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. I have read every book that Holly Jackson has put out, and I don't really like mystery thrillers. I don't find them that interesting, but hers are so batshit. I love them. Also the characters are always really fun. And this was her newest one. I got to read an early copy of this and go to an author talk 2 days after it came out. She was in kind of San Francisco. She was at Book Passage in Corte Madera, and I went to that. And since it was 2 days after release, I was one of the only people who had actually read the book, and it was so much fun. Oh my god. I got to talk to her. There's a video. So much. I love her. She's a new book coming out in July this year, and I will be clutching that so fast. But The Reappearance of Rachel Price is about a girl. I think her name is Belle, Annabelle Price. And her mom, Rachel Price, disappeared when she was really young, mysteriously, and was the subject of a lot of, true crime YouTube videos and shit. And now they're making, now Belle's, a teenager, and they're making a proper documentary on her mom's disappearance. And during the filming of this documentary, her mom reappears. And no one really knows what's going on. So, it's wild. It's so much fun. I love it. As usual, it's got a tiny little side romance that doesn't really get a super happy or satisfying ending, but I really love the love interest in this. He's very goofy. The characters are always fun. I like Belle. I think she's a lot different than Holly Jackson's other female main characters. They're all a little different, but she's kind of a bitch and totally has reason to be. I also read 5 Survive by Holly Jackson, and that one's also really great. But this one, I don't know. I remember I was reading the early copy, on my computer in art history class, and I was on the edge of my seat. I was I was sad. I was so excited, and it was such a fun time. Again, it's it's not even really about, the twist for me, the solution. It's just about how crazy it is. And I think it was as crazy as I needed it to be. Her books are always really easy to read. If you like mystery... Honestly, if you don't like mystery, I feel if you like mystery, you'll think her books are not that great. But if you don't like mystery and you just want a fun time, I feel they're fantastic. She's also the Good Girl's Guide to Murder author, if you aren't aware, which is a fantastic series that I read. I read all 3 books in 3 days last year, 2023, on the floor of my bedroom over the summer during a depressive episode, which I highly recommend reading them that way, actually. It was great. And I'll continue to read her. I love her. She's not a bi author. So, yeah, that's The Reappearance of Rachel Price. Just a good old-fashioned good time. Next, we have another book that I got as an early copy. This is A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. This, by the way, this is beautiful. Can we just appreciate? I got a physical copy when it came out. This is a, weird Gothic historical about these 2 guys who, it's the late 1800s-ish in Britain somewhere, but they're in the countryside, and they live in this mansion-sized greenhouse, and one of them is a botanist of rare and weird plants, and the other guy's a taxidermist. who makes like weird little scenes where like, you know, the creatures are getting married or sword fighting or they're having a little funeral. It's just like weird shit. And the botanist gets a delivery of this fungus that like is like low-key sentient, and he's like, if we combine our powers, by the way, they're like gay married, but like they're old, like gay married and also secret, but they live in a fucking greenhouse, so no one's bothering them. He's like, if we combine our powers and you like make a person and I implant this fungus and stuff, we can have a daughter of our own in like a weird way. So it's kind of a Frankenstein retelling. And there's also a girl who comes by, like a little housekeeper, and maybe she falls in love with the daughter. I don't know. But it also kind of goes wrong. It's a little bit of a horror, but it's just weird. It's just a good time. I knew when I read the description of this that I was like, I need it right now. It's not super scary, but it is like, it's a little chilling. It's just fun. I really enjoyed this. I would put this in the same category as like the Monster of Elendhaven in terms of like toxic couple not really getting along, doing like low-key horrible things, but we love them for it. Yeah, beautiful. A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. Love it. I also talked to the author after I read it, because it had a fairly small release. And I was like, I loved it so much. It was so good. And he was like, oh my god, thank you. So Noah Medlock, whatever you come up with next, I will be reading. I don't care. You seem like a very sweet person. Next up, we have The Pairing by Casey McQuiston, which I don't have a copy of. I also read this as an early copy. There's a whole thing of how I got an early copy of this. They had it as open request on accident, and I managed to grab it before they fixed it. But I got a copy. This is Casey McQuiston is the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue and One Last Stop, which I both liked. Or they also wrote I Kissed Shara Wheeler, which was a YA book that I liked less, but I like their books, okay? And this was everything. It's contemporary romance about two exes who both, like, when they were together, they arranged this, like, European food tour, because one of them's a chef and one of them's, like, a mixologist, so they were like, cool, well, that's why it's called The Pairing. And right before they were about to go on it, they broke up. And then it's, like, 3 or 4 years later, and the company who does the food tour was like, oh, if you go on another one within 4 years, like, you know, you can use the money you spent to go on another one, because we won't refund you, but we'll let you go on another tour for free, since you missed the one. Both separately, without talking about it and without knowing, they, like, 4 years later, end up on the same tour. And their little rivalry inspires them to have a competition to see who can hook up with the most people. Like, in each city they visit, who can hook up with, like, one person from each city, and whoever has the most, like, wins. So it's really, like, slutty book. It's so fun. It's emotional. It definitely, like, has angsty moments, but it was definitely, like, good beach read. I know it's fully January, but I think you can bring the beach wherever you want. I read this on the senior trip, and it was perfect. Just very sweaty. A lot of beautiful, you know, European vistas and weird hot people from each area of Europe that somehow perfectly fit the area, and like competitive sluttiness, which I thought was really funny. Also, it is second chance romance, so, you know, they find their way back to each other in their own way, and kind of how they've grown and apologized and stuff. I just thought it was lovely. I don't really like second chance romance usually, but Casey McQuiston can make it work. What can I say? I think if you like contemporary romance, this will scratch the itch. It also has some of the most creative sex scenes I've ever read. Like, it's not the usual progression. They're all not things I've pictured before, but worked very well. I highly recommend. I don't know why I'm ending on that note, but too bad. It was good. Read it, if that's your thing. Next, we have On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This is another, like, pretty popular one that caught me by surprise, because I don't tend to like this kind of lit fic. It just doesn't hit for me that much. This one did hit. I also originally listened to the audiobook of this, and I think it's narrated by the author, and I actually very much recommend doing that because they read it in a really beautiful way. And I remember listening to the audiobook while I was like walking into Trader Joe's here in Portland, and it was like raining, and I was like, this is so atmospheric. It's a very sad kind of coming of age story about a young boy. There's definitely some aspects of this that I think that are autobiographical, but it is a novel, it is fiction, and kind of a lot about his experience and relationship with his mother and her kind of generational trauma and her being an immigrant and how that impacted his life. And then later also when he realizes that he's queer, how that interacts with queerness and acceptance and masculinity and all this. And it's all written as like a letter to his mother. It was so like heartbreaking. I was like, it was rough. But really beautiful. There's some really good lines. I kind of want to go back. I did recommend the audiobook, but I do also want to go back on like an ebook copy or something so I can highlight stuff, because there was just a lot of moments that I was like, oh, I wish I could have highlighted that, because that would have been nice to save. There's some really good lines in here. I feel like a lot of immigrant parent narratives, like first-gen child narratives, I always kind of ick me out because it comes away with like, well, your parents suffered so much, so you should just forgive any trauma that they passed on to you. This, I think, pushes back against that a little bit. There's specifically a line I'm thinking of where it's like, kind of the idea is like, what you did was wrong. It doesn't make it less wrong that you suffered for it. Like, I didn't deserve to have that passed on to me. I won't stay mad. You know, you're important to me anyway. Which is just, I think, summed up my thoughts a lot better than a lot of these kinds of stories. So yeah, gorgeous, beautiful writing. Ocean Vuong has a new novel coming out this year called The Emperor of Gladness, and I will be reading it because this was great. I think they also write poetry. I have not read any of that. I'm not really a big poetry person, but I bet it's good. If you like poetry, probably, yeah. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Nice surprise. Next. This is kind of a double recommend. Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang, but also his other short story collection, Exhalation. I read both of them this year. Oh my god. Whoops. Anyway, read both of them this year, and they were both amazing. They were both so good. They're both like science fiction and like some fantasy short story collections. And this man is just a genius. Like, I don't know what to tell you. He's just like the smartest person ever. All of these stories are just crazy, so inventive, so new. And just to explain how like complex they are, the titular story in this is called Stories of Her Life. That one story inspired the entire movie Arrival. It's just based on one short story. And they're kind of long for short stories. Well, there's a range. Some of them are like 1 to 6 pages. A lot of them are like 30 to 40. Yeah, the idea that like a 20 to 30 page story can inspire an entire movie, like, these are crazy stories. I love them. I also love the ones in Exhalation. I think probably my favorite from this, I don't know why, it's called Division by Zero. It's one of the shorter ones, where a mathematician essentially finds a proof that disproves, like, the consistency of arithmetics, and kind of their entire, like, belief system kind of crumbles in a way that kind of mirrors, like, the classic story of a religious person finding out some veritable proof that God doesn't exist. Like, their whole, like, understanding of the world crumbles in a really interesting way. And also something about reading short stories. First of all, I feel like a lot of short story collections, most of them are like duds, and there's like 2 or 3 good ones. I'd say almost all of these are bangers, and same is true for Exhalation. Like, almost every single one, if not every single one, is like one of the best short stories you've ever read. I like reading his short story collections altogether because you can see a lot of like themes that are consistent across stories, one of which is like religion and like in comparison to technology. Fate versus free will is a big one. Linguistics is in a lot of stories, including Stories of Her Life, the one that inspired Arrival. Obviously, I love those stories. I'm a linguistics person. But yeah, you really can't go wrong. I mean, I'm kind of sad that I found these this year because Exhalation came out in like 2020 and this came out in like 2012. So I still probably have like 3 years or something until the next collection comes out. But he's just a genius. He really talks about a lot of different ideas and also like scientific ideas with a really impressive understanding. I think he used to be a scientist. I'm not sure. But crazy. So good. Really inspiring as someone who writes science fiction and horror short stories. This is the only short story collection on the list. Spoiler. Okay, this next one I have to talk about because I haven't seen anyone talking about this book, or these books, the series. I'm putting them together, and they're fantastic. This is a special edition, so I'll also put like the normal cover somewhere. This is Bonesmith, like the Bonesmith Duology by Nikki Paupreto. The second book is called Ghostsmith. I have a beautiful copy. Beautiful. I love this copy so much. Anyway, this is a YA fantasy duology. Tentatively romantasy. There is romance, and it is a pretty central part of the plot. And yet I never see people talking about these. These are so good. This is the best romantasy that I've read in like ages. The main character is belongs to the Bonesmiths. So there's like bonesmiths, ironsmiths, like woodsmiths, like, and they can all like magically manipulate these things. And she's training to be a Valkyr, which would make her, like, a formal necromancer, and would, like, her job would be to get rid of spirits, which kind of plague the land. And during her trials, she's sabotaged, and her father, who's, like, the leader of the Valkyrs, sends her to a, like, border wall, like, kind of out of shame, like, get away from here, to guard the border wall, which separates the mainlands from the haunted lands where the ironsmiths used to live, but where they were cut off from. And on the border, she gets visited by the prince of, like, the whole kingdom, and they become, like, friends. And then he's immediately kidnapped by ironsmiths. And also, in that fight, the prince is kidnapped. She falls down a ravine with one of the ironsmiths who gets betrayed by the other ironsmiths. Despite, like, low-key being enemies, they start working together to track down the prince and also the ironsmiths who betrayed this ironsmith. They have a little romance. Oh my god. This is fantastic. Like, the romance is good. I love the characters. The world building is really cool and pretty, like, in-depth. Especially for, like, YA fantasy romance. It gets really crazy, especially in the second book. I read both of the books this year. I got an early copy of the second one. I think it came out, like, only a few months ago. But they're both just, like, awesome. Pacing is amazing. As I said, the romance is good. I love the characters. I like the magic system a lot. And, I don't know, there's, like, a fun dynamic between, especially in the first book, between the main character, the ironsmith, and the prince. They have, like, a weird little... It's not like a love triangle, they're just, like, friends. And the prince is kind of, like, bisexual, so he's just, like, flirting with both of them. It's great. I don't remember if I read this because it was... I think, yeah, there was a comparison to Gideon the Ninth. It's not really like the Locktomb Trilogy, which is another one of my favorites. I have special editions up here. It's not really like that, but there is necromancy, and the main character does kind of give Gideon vibes of just being, like, a badass and, like, jacked and really confident and, like, fun and, like, making jokes at, like, really inappropriate moments. So I think that's where the comparison comes from, and I will say that it does kind of give you your Gideon fix, if not all of the insanity of those books. So yeah, Bonesmith. Please, if you like Divine Rivals and those kind of, like, YA romance fantasy duologies and stuff, this one, it's finished, it's amazing, it's so good. I need more people to read this. I think it's really, really underrated and totally flew under the radar this year. So yeah. Next up, we have Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. I read this at the end of the year. This was really good. All throughout winter break, I was making videos on my close friend's story about the books I was reading, so I didn't go crazy. And when I made the video about this one, I was like, I can't really put a rating on this because it feels too personal, both to the author and kind of to me in a way. It's based off of the author's mother's childhood, growing up in like a large family. The mother is white, the father is Cherokee. They kind of move around a lot when she's really young, but eventually settle in Ohio, and you just learn a lot about how, like, a lot of mental illness and physical disabilities and stuff ran in the family, and her mother's has a real struggle with, like, depression and kind of mania, and her siblings basically get fucking, like, picked off one by, like, accidents, drug addiction, suicide. It's quite heavy, but it's also like really beautiful. I mean, the setting of kind of like rural Ohio, it's just a really nice backdrop. I think it's I don't know if Ohio is in Appalachia, but they definitely spend like one of the places that the family settles is definitely in Appalachia. And one thing that makes it more interesting from the perspective of that girl Betty is that of all of her siblings, they all kind of pass as white except for her. She's darker than them, like closer to how her father looks. And also in this story, you would expect kind of an abusive, like horrible father, but he's actually kind of a like pillar of light and joy across the story. Very hardworking and like kind individual who doesn't so much teach the kids about like his culture as an indigenous person, but uses kind of the tradition of storytelling in the way that he parents them in a way that I thought was just like really gorgeous and very like striking. I really want to reread this over like a longer period of time. I read it in a day because that's what I was doing over break, but I want to like give myself more time and like annotate it and really think through it because it's one of those kinds of books. But I think if you like literary kinds of stuff, I think this will really hit for you. I read it because it was recommended by the same YouTuber who liked Beartown, Newly Nova, Lex from Newly Nova. And I was like, well, I like Beartown, so I'll probably also like this. And I do. I like it in a much different way, but it definitely hit somewhere very, very different than a lot of other books. I think it's really, really beautiful, though. I do recommend it, but, you know, proceed with caution. Again, maybe check trigger warnings if that's something that you feel you might need to do. Yeah, Betty. Tiffany McDaniel. Very different vibe. Next we have Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. First of all, the new covers. I'm obsessed. They're so pretty. This I read when I was like moving in to read, and it is so good. This I think in some ways is similar to I Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. I read this first, where it's like you don't get all the answers you're not really supposed to. It's so like weird and intriguing that it just ends up being very satisfying anyway. It's the first in the series, and it is about this area called Area X on like a coastline that is kept separate from the rest of the world by a like government branch or something called Southern Reach. And Southern Reach only allows like select people to go into Area X to like explore it because it's kind of this weird, uncanny, dangerous area. A lot of the people they send in don't come back. They like go crazy. Some of them do come back and they don't remember anything, or they're just like always different. The main character's husband was part of a prior like research team that got sent in, and he did return, but he like never got back to normal. And he also didn't return the way he was supposed to. He just kind of somehow wandered back, and they don't know how. He wandered back to like their home and like didn't remember what happened. So she goes on another research team. There's kind of weird, like, freaky fungal shit. There's this, like, it's like a staircase down into the earth, but, like, inexplicably, the main character, like, senses that it's a tower. Like, she calls it a tower, despite the fact that it only goes down. And there's, like, writing on the walls all the way down, and there's, like, a freaky lighthouse. And also she keeps a journal. It's, like, this is her journal that you're reading. But, like, none of the journals of any of the research missions have ever returned. And it's always been kind of a mystery where they go. So good. So weird. So freaky. Very, like, unsettling, but, like, really interesting. Kind of cosmic horror if you're into that. I will say I tried to read the second book and I kind of hated it, which a lot of people say that it's like bad. I might continue the series. I kind of doubt it because I would probably have to reread the second book, and I could not do that. It was just like not for me. I kind of think you should just read this as a standalone and be happy that even though you don't get any answers. But it was really good. Highly recommend. We're into the last 3 of the honorable mentions, and I have Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White. This is another special edition, so I'll put the normal cover somewhere so you know what it normally looks like. This is by the same author as Hell Followed With Us, if you know that. Andrew Joseph White so far exclusively writes like YA horror with trans man main characters, which I'm so here for. Except I think his next book is an adult book, but it's also horror. And I got an early copy of this. I had previously read his other 2 books, The Spirit Bears Its Teeth and Hell Followed With Us. Spirit Bears Its Teeth is still my favorite, and I also have a matching copy of that. Compound Fracture is so cool. It was about a young trans boy in Appalachia, small town in Appalachia, former mining town. His family and like the sheriff's family have like a blood feud going back like many years, and the sheriff's son and his friends like beat the main character like almost to death, and he ends up in the hospital. And after that he keeps seeing this like apparition of some guy who he suspects might be one of his ancestors. I think it's like his great-grandfather, who was involved in like starting the original blood feud. But it's just like wild. I mean, it is horror. Don't take that for granted. Don't say, oh, it's YA horror, it's probably fine. No, these are pretty intense books. It's not like, oh, trans people suffering horribly. Like, it is, but it's also like how pain and fear and queer identity kind of empowers people. And also just like queer rage and vengeance and shit. That's a lot of his books. And also just like in a less crazy sense, like finding queer communities and how important that is to livelihood. That's relevant here and especially relevant in his other 2 books. They're all amazing. Please read them. I really liked this one. As I said, Spirit Bears Its Teeth is still my favorite. But yeah, this one, I mean, you can't go wrong. Wait, let me just show you the end papers, because look at how cool these are. That's like the apparition. Cool. But yeah. So good. Can't recommend these enough. Next, we have The Sunshine Court by Nora Sakavic. This is the continuation of the Foxhole Court, or the All for the Game series. I'm not going to overly defend myself or something liking this series. I love it. I don't care. I know people say it's stupid and badly written and overdramatic, and I don't give a shit. It's one of my favorites. Rereading the original series in preparation for reading the new book was like some of the most fun I had all year. Like, fucked up fun. That original series is really dark. Definitely check trigger warnings. To explain this book, I kind of have to give you the concept of the original series, which is that there's this game called Exy, which is like a combination of like lacrosse and squash and like hockey. Like, it's like lacrosse but way more violent and also in like a big glass box. It's taken the world by storm, and also like there's a lot of mafia ties to like the college level teams. It's a whole thing. It's crazy and unrealistic, and I don't care. The Sunshine Court and the whole trilogy that this is starting are going to follow Jean and Jeremy from the original series as Jean heals from the insane amount of trauma he experienced in the first series. Good lord, that man did not catch a break. Jeremy, who's like mostly normal, he's a part of the Trojans, which are like not tied to the mafia, how he's gonna kind of facilitate Jean's healing, and they take him in and he finds new family and friendships and stuff among the Trojans without as much of the abuse as he suffered under the Ravens. It was nice. It's definitely like slower paced and like less crazy than the original Foxhole Court series. A little more focused on like healing and not horrible, violent trauma the entire time. There is still some of that, not gonna lie. I do also think Nora Sokovic's kind of laughing at how she wrote dialogue in the original where it's all very melodramatic and they're all like crazy. Because there's times when like Jean and Neil from the original series talk and Jeremy, who's like normal, is just watching them like, no one talks like this. Like, what the fuck are they talking about? And it's so funny. I couldn't not put it on the list. I love that original series. I think this is a great addition. There's a bunch of stuff in here like cooking. Like, I just know there's a bunch of, especially right at the end, if you know what I'm talking about. I can see things being seeded that will be important later. I think the next book is coming out. Originally it was supposed to come out like around now, like in January or in the winter. I think she pushed it back a little because she's redoing some of the plot. I would hesitate to recommend the original series, but I gotta put it here. I don't know. Last for honorable mentions, we have a book that I have very mixed feelings about, but I kind of have to put on here just generally. It is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Okay, the premise for this book is amazing. It's these two childhood friends who met in the hospital. The boy had like an accident, I think, that damaged his leg. Sam, his name is Sam. His leg was damaged in an accident, I think. And he spent a lot of time in the hospital having it like reconstructed. And Sadie, who's the girl, I believe her sister was sick, like terminally ill or something when she was a child, so they spent a lot of time in the hospital together, like playing video games, trying to distract themselves. And then they re-meet as like young adults. I think they're both in college at that point, and decide to work on a game together, like a video game. And they kind of grow this like huge empire based on their original game. They build like a whole whole team, whole production team and stuff. But there's just a lot. It's very emotional. There's a lot of highs and lows. Sam's leg becomes a problem again. He has like horrible pain with it. Those scenes are very hard for me to read as someone who has chronic leg pain. And Sadie is really like not suited to like the spotlight. And it's not really a romance, but it's very much like an intense friendship, almost an obsession with one another. How they have kind of fallings out and stuff. And each like section of this book is written in a different way that I thought was really cool. I really like those. There is my qualm with this book that I think it could have been a favorite if not for this one bit. At like the 75% mark, if you've read it, let me know if you know what I mean. There's a major plot event that for me really like cut off the momentum of the rest of the book. Like, it was still good after that, but I was like, why would you do that? And it felt like a tool. Like, it felt like as a reader I was like, oh, the author is doing this to create conflict. And I feel like that's not something that should be so obvious to the reader. I know a lot of people love this book. I really love, like, the first 50% of it was fantastic. It's really creative, super well written and stuff. The last half, I think, kind of gets a little jumbled for me. I do recommend it, but even more so, I want to talk about it with other people because I feel like it was so strange how that kind of ended up. Yeah, but yeah. Fantastic premise. I've read another one of Gabrielle Zevin's books since. I read The Storied Life of A.J. Filkry. I like that one a lot less. It was still fine. Tomorrow. I know why this got famous. You know, like, I get the hype. But I have some things with that. So yeah. But still kind of had to put it on the list because it was just so memorable. Yeah. Tomorrow. Enough positivity. Honorable mentions over. We are on to the worst books of the year. So let me remind you, despite the fact that I have been all joyous and positive this whole video, I am a hater at my heart. Having said that, not all of these are like strictly the worst books I read, but they're all here because they were bad in some, like, remarkable way. Like, there's something memorable about how bad they were. I read plenty of mediocre books, or just books where I was like, this is not for me. These were either hugely disappointing, or felt, like, problematic and icky, or were just insane, or 3 of these also were DNFs. So I didn't actually finish them. You can try to convince me to. I kind of highly doubt that it'll work for these specifically, but I'll explain why and what happened and all that jazz. It's time for the hating to begin. I have a Diet Coke to help me through this, because I will need it. First up, we have Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. My dormmates might remember me coming into the common room when I was like 80% of the way through this book and being like, oh, I don't want to finish it, but I'm already 80% of the way through. I'm so sad. I wanted to like this book a lot. Silvia Moreno Garcia is like a very celebrated science fiction fantasy author. She has like a lot of books and they're all sound really cool. This is her most famous one. So I wanted to try it, hoping to find a new author that I could love and read the entire backlist of. Did not happen. It had, like, everything that I hate about Gothic books. But it follows main character who, she's, like, it's like the 1920s or something in Mexico. And she's kind of, living her best life in, like, her teens or early 20s or something. Kind of getting around with a bunch of lovers and all that. And her father, who's like, you need to get married. He's like, okay, you can put off getting married a little longer if you go visit your sister, because she got a letter from her sister who is already married, where her sister's like, help me, get me out of here. Because her sister's married to this white guy. Like, she's married to this rich white family who live on this big estate, like, very separate from where the rest of the family lives. Like the rest of the sister's family. So the girl goes and visits her sister to see why her sister is, like, freaking the fuck out. And she comes to this house. It's very clearly, like, weird. There's weird shit going on. The father of the man that the sister married is, like, weirdly into eugenics and stuff, and is constantly talking about, like, the main character and her sister's race and stuff. So there's definitely some, like, weird Get Out shit going on. And also, like, she's having weird dreams. The wildlife is kind of weird, and the brother's kind of weird, and it's all kind of weird. I don't know. It was just, I was dragging myself kicking and screaming through this book. It just has the constant thing that I, like, hate, where it's like, is this a dream? Is it not? Who knows? Which I think is stupid, because then you can just make anything happen for, like, shock value and be like, oh, but it was a dream, so it has no bearing on the actual plot. And I kind of think that's dumb. I feel like if you put something crazy in the book, you should have to deal with the implications of that crazy thing happening. So I was just, like, annoyed the whole time. I was like, I don't care about this. The main character was, like, not that interesting. It had kind of, like, plant fungus horror, but in, like, a really overdone, like, not interesting way. The resolution was not interesting. I don't know. It's not even a very long book, but it felt long. It felt so long, and I was so done by the end of it. I was, like, skimming the last bits, because I was just like, I don't care about this at all. I was so bored. So yeah, that was a big disappointment. I was really sad. Maybe I'll give Silvia Moreno Garcia another chance, because to be fair, I don't generally like classic Gothic style. I know the dream thing's a big thing in Gothic style, and also, like, haunted houses and stuff like that I just don't enjoy. So she has other books. Maybe I'll give one that sounds more up my alley, like another shot. But I don't know. I'm kind of flip-flopping on that. We'll see. Okay. Ooh. Dead Collections by Isaac Fellman. Okay, so the premise for this that I heard that made me buy and read this book was trans vampire archivists. And I was like, you can't fuck this up. This is how you fuck this up. It was so uncomfortable. Oh my god. Okay, so the main character is an archivist, like, that's his job, and he also happens to be a vampire. I don't remember how he became a vampire, but he's a vampire. He's also a trans man. And he keeps noticing this thing where like archival materials like rot when they're around him, and other vampire archivists like online also notice this happening. So it's like some weird thing that happens around vampires. I don't know. And he also meets this like woman and who's also a vampire, and they have like a romantic relationship. And I was listening to the audiobook for this when I was working at the library in like the spring, and it was so uncomfortable. Something about the way that they like talk to each other and about each other was like aching me the fuck out. There was also smut in this, which I was not expecting. And the combination of like how it was written and the fact that I wasn't expecting it, I was like literally nauseous like listening to this. I cannot explain enough how like uncomfortable I was. I'm not like against smut. Several of the books I recommended on the favorites list were like smutty books, but it was just something about it. I was like, ugh. And also, I feel this book has some problematic ideas surrounding transness. A big like conclusion that the book seems to draw is that like all butch lesbians are closeted trans men, and all trans men are former butch lesbians, which is just like weird and outdated, and also like very invalidating to both groups. Like, you can totally be a butch lesbian and not be like denying something about your true identity. And also, like, plenty of trans men are not butch lesbians, were not butch lesbians before they transitioned. Plenty of trans men don't like women. Are not attracted to women. I mean, or were femme before. I was like a femme bisexual prior to transitioning. It just icks me the fuck out. Even thinking about it, I'm like, heebie-jeebies. It's not long, but man, it felt long. I was like, gross, yuck. Left me with a bad aftertaste. Even now, I'm like, yeah, I don't know what the fuck is going on there. Yuck. Sad, because Isaac Feldman's coming out with a book this year that sounded really interesting to me. I think it's called Notes on a Regicide, but I will not read it because I'm not putting myself through that or supporting an author that I feel has quite problematic ideas. Next, this was one that I read at the end of the year, and there's a story behind this. Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. If you went to Harker in middle school and you're watching this, do you guys remember that we read Flowers for Algernon in 7th grade in English class, and they just kind of gave us like a 40-page packet where like, this is Flowers for Algernon, and didn't tell us that it's like a full novel, and we all just kind of went up thinking this was a short story, and we read all of it? That's not just my experience. I've asked other people. My sister also did that and thought that, and like other friends from Harker also did that and thought that. No, it's a full novel, and I really liked when we read the like 40-page packet. It's a really cool idea, so I wanted to read the full novel, and immediately found out why they cut out like 90% of this book. Because, man, yeah. So the premise, if you don't know, this is a very famous book. It's from the 60s, and it feels like it. It follows a man named Charlie Gordon, who is, like, severely mentally impaired. He has, like, extreme memory troubles, so he can't really learn to read or write or anything very well. And, like, just kind of his general knowledge and, like, social understanding is very impaired. And then he gets selected to be, like, the first human subject in this experiment that they've only done on rats so far, where they like do some brain surgery and it like triples your IQ or something, like makes you not only like whatever normal level of intelligence, but actually like makes you into like prodigy, like a genius, like IQ wise. The rat that was most successful up until this point is named Algernon. Now he's like an extremely smart rat. That's where the title comes from. So you see this kind of progression of Charlie Gordon not understanding a lot of things about his reality. And it's all done like lab logs, so he's also like poorly spelling things. It makes the first bit of the story very hard to read because he misspells a lot of words. He like interprets a lot of like social situations like incorrectly, where he's being made fun of and just doesn't realize it. And then once he becomes like more cognizant, more like intelligent, and like realizes what's going on, he just loses a lot of the relationships he has up until that point because he realizes everyone's kind of been laughing at him and not with him. All of this very interesting. There's also kind of a whole other part of the novel that I don't want to spoil. I don't think it's in the description, but it's kind of a central part of the story. The thing is, with this premise, there's so many avenues that you could explore that would be interesting. One that would not occur to me to be the central focus of the entire novel is Charlie Gordon's, newly evolved sexuality. Sure, I guess we can talk about that, and I guess we can talk about that for, 2/3 of the book, because what else really matters? What else really makes you human, if not being sexually attracted to women for, the first time? And it just gets into a lot of, weird sexual trauma that he had as, a young boy, and, being impaired, and his mother, beating him if he showed any, sexual attraction, because she thought, he couldn't conceptualize what that was and how that impairs his later sexual relationships. And I was like, I don't want to hear about this. Or at least, I think if it was, mentioned, at some point in the book as, a side thing, it would have been interesting. But that's, the main thing in this book. That inspires, most of his interaction with other people. And I was just it's also very, Freudian psychosexual bullshit, because this was the 60s. And also, it's low-key misogynist, and women are very much described in that, 60s male author way of, a woman enters the scene, how attracted is the main character to this woman? Immediately, it's oh, she was thick but firm, and you're why don't, this is, your teacher. I don't want to hear about it. This is your nurse, or, some random woman walking down the street. You have to describe her in, the grossest way. As if that's how all men, assess women when they meet them. It was just, fantastic premise, in my opinion, thrown away in the full novel. Honestly, I still stand by that 40-page packet was, way better than the full novel, and I'm really sad about that. I think that premise really could have covered some interesting topics, but it just doesn't, so it was really kind of a letdown. But, yeah. Okay, this one is batshit. This is Darker Mischief by Derek Millman. I got an early copy of this because it was marketed as YA, queer, dark academia with secret societies. And I was fuck yeah. Sign me up. And then, a month or two later, I still hadn't read it. I had the copy and I hadn't read it. One of my friends on Goodreads, who also got an early copy, reviewed it. And it was she was saying the craziest shit about this book. I was I have to read it. She hated it. She gave it 0, 1 star. And I was I need to read this. It is so insane. Anyway, okay. I'm going to try and break down some of this for you. I can't explain how insane it is in a short amount of time. We'd need a 40-minute conversation to cover all of the bullshit in this book. First, our main character, Cal, is at this boarding school, which is a high school, by the way. This is YA. It won't feel like it when I talk about it, but it is. Cal is at this boarding school because he's on scholarship, and he had to leave his small town because, one, he had a relationship with a guy, a secret relationship, because he's gay, and this other guy's gay, but the other guy's closeted. He had a relationship with that guy, and that guy randomly decided, I'm actually not gay. So he decided to attack Cal and pour acid into his eyes. So Cal is now missing one eye and wears an eye patch. Another reason Cal had to leave is because his father, who I think is by profession a lawyer or something, also on the side has a homemade haunted house that's one of those crazy intense haunted houses where you have to sign a waiver and they can touch you and hit you and give you drugs and shit. But he wasn't having people sign waivers, and someone died in the haunted house, had a heart attack out of fear. So now his dad is being hella sued, and his mom I think has cancer. A lot of reasons to leave. He goes to this boarding school. He meets this kid, this jock named Luke. Luke is he vandalizes things, and his tag is a fetus with a bite out of it. And the reason why Luke tells Cal is because Luke consumed his twin in the womb, ate him. And also Luke happens to see the apparition of his dead twin just around. This is just the setup. This is like 20 pages into the book. They try to join a secret society, and the secret society on campus, for some reason, it's never really explained why. Their purpose is to like go into abandoned buildings on this really old campus and like find out historical information about them. Not really clear why. Oh, I should say, the prologue of this book is like way into the future, where they've kidnapped the vice president's daughter. That's how it starts. And then they're like, let's go back and see how we got up to that point. Like, freeze frame, you're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation. So eventually, yeah, a whole bunch of other shit happens. Including, there's a part where Luke gets, like, sexually assaulted by, like, the head of the secret society. And Cal walks in. By the way, Cal's name is short for, like, Calypsy or something. He has, like, a stupid name. It's not short for, like, Callum or something. Cal walks in on Luke being assaulted, interprets it as Luke cheating on him. Cal then goes to an orgy at this high school boarding school and gets herpes. And that's, like, a central part of it. Like, that's fully, like, something that happens, and they're just like, anyway, we're just gonna brush over that happening. Eventually, they help kidnap the president's daughter for, like, ransom or something, and this is something that the secret society has done before. It's not really clear why. It seems like maybe that's how they get their funding, is through ransoming rich people's children. So they capture the vice president's daughter and, like, store her somewhere. And suddenly, like, the leader of the secret society is like, we have to kill her. Again, not clear why. Cal, like, I don't know, realizes his morality and, like, tries to stop them, but Luke is, like, really deeply ingrained in the secret society or something. So Cal, like, releases her or something, I don't even remember. And Luke, like, goes chasing after him through the steam tunnels. The thing about steam tunnels is that they have, like, cracks and, like, steam comes out, and it can be really dangerous because you can get horrible burns. Anyway, Cal's running through. Luke gets hit by a steam thing and, like, loses his arm. I think at that point in, like, the epilogue, which happens, like, years later, you learn that Luke left the school and Cal stayed, and eventually I think became, like, staff at the school. I don't remember what he did. Luke, like, becomes a drug addict or something, or an alcoholic, and gets into a car accident when he's under the influence and dies, but he's an organ donor. And Cal finds out who received Luke's heart. They've been broken up for, like, years at this point. He finds out who received Luke's heart and, like, calls them and is like, can you make a recording of your heart, which is actually Luke's heart? And the person sends him a recording for some reason, and Cal falls asleep to that every night. And that's how the book ends. And this is my recollection from, like, 6 months ago. I'm not remembering, like, probably most of the crazy shit. So, don't read this book. Honestly, the first, like, half of this book I kind of enjoyed because it was so insane that it was, like, entertaining. Second half got so, like, jumbled, I was, like, lost. I was, like, gone, and it was not in, like, a fun way. I've spent 7 minutes talking about how crazy this book is. It's definitely crazier than I remember. A Darker Mischief by Derek Millman. What the fuck was that? And why was it YA? It's also really horny. They fuck, like, constantly. A Language of Dragons by S.F. Williams. I was so excited for this book. I got an early copy. It was one of my, like, most anticipated reads for early this year. It's out now, I think. And this book was so disappointing. It was supposed to be, like, Babel with dragons, like, dragon linguistics, and I was like, fuck yeah. It was horrible. The premise is, like, this girl who, like, her parents are prominent dragon linguists, and she's also, like, studying to be one. And her parents get arrested because they're sympathetic to, like, the dragon, like, resistance. There's, like, dragons that are on the side of the humans, and there's, like, a dragon resistance. And they get taken away, and the government is like, we need your help. You, a teenager, we need your help. Decoding this, like, secret dragon language that they won't tell us about. And if you don't help us, we will, like, your parents will be in prison forever, and or we will kill them and your baby sister. So she goes to help, and it's not really a language, it's like a code, and there was, like, hardly any dragons. One thing, first complaint, like, no dragons. There was, like, one dragon that was, like, actually, like, a character involved in this. The linguistics was really weird. Like, there's this whole thing where the government's, like, really insistent that the dragons don't have dialects for some reason, even though they speak a bunch of languages. It's not ever explained why they're so insistent on this, but surprise twist from the very beginning that the parents are like, maybe they have dialects. Surprise twist, they have dialects. Ooh, like, fucking every language has dialects, especially one spoken as widely as the dragon languages in this. Also, like, her romance. There's, like, a romance, the main character, with one of the other kids who's, like, enlisted by the government to help. And he's, like, a priest in training, and he, like, gives... Like, he always has been, and that's, like, been his life calling. And he, like, gives it up so that they can have, like, a relationship. And I was like, that's really icky. Like, I don't really love... organized religion, but I was like, that's weird to, like, give up your entire life's calling and, like, a lot of your faith because you just want to, like, be with this girl who, by the way, sucks. We need to stop, like, saying this character is morally gray and then just make them, like, annoying and wrong and, like, stubborn about being annoying and wrong. That's not what morally gray means. Siona from Blood Over Brighthaven is morally gray. She comes in with extremely, like, bigoted beliefs and stuff because of her upbringing and through her understanding of how her experience as a woman in, like, the high society parallels Tommel's experience as an immigrant, even as a man. Like, she comes to an understanding, and it's a slow process, and it's difficult, and she has to work for it. This character is just, like, stubbornly, like, bigoted, and all the other characters, for some reason, aren't. Like, they all, like, get it. They all, like, understand that's wrong. And they keep explaining to her why her beliefs are, like, incorrect. And she keeps being like, no, because it just, like, benefits her. And also she just does some shit stuff that... It's like, I don't know why anyone would ever forgive her for what she did. So yeah, she's just, like, a bad person and, like, not morally gray or, like, interesting. She's just kind of a bad person. Oh, and there's also, like, some weird-ass conclusions about, like, race and class and intersectionality. There's, like, a one-off exchange where one of the characters is, like, people of color have it worse, generally, in this world. And I'm like, okay, yeah, true in our world and apparently in this one. And then another character is like, oh, what about this girl? Because there's another girl who is a part of this, like, team of teens helping the government who is in, like, the first cast, but she's black. And they're like, oh, well, it's different for her because she's in the first cast. So she doesn't, like, experience racism. And I was like, that is not how that works. Like, you have a different kind of privilege, maybe, but you don't not experience racism, especially from other people in, the high class, and also, like, general systematic discrimination. Like, it was just a weirder thing to say, and also a weird thing to, like, brush off in, like, 2 sentences. There's just a lot of shit stuff going on. It was also just, like, boring, which is, like, the crime of the century. It was not about language. It was about, like, code breaking. It was uninteresting. I didn't like the romance. I didn't like the characters. The world building was jank as hell. It was bad. It was so disappointing. I was so ready for this. So ready to love it. Final 4. We're chugging through the worst books. I read the entire Caraval Trilogy. And I don't know why. Okay, if you love Caraval, skip this part. I'm gonna roast the fuck out of the series because I hated it and I don't know why I kept reading. Well, I do know why. I'll explain to you why. I heard so much about the sequel series about, like, Evangeline and Jax. I don't remember what it's called. Caraval was bad. It was bad. The world building is, like, non-existent. They're just like, you just have to accept that there's this weird carnival thing that happens and they can grant wishes. No magic system, don't worry about it. The main characters are these 2 sisters who, by all appearances seem to, like, hate each other, but apparently love each other enough to die for one another, even though the fact that the younger sister is the dumbest person ever, which I will explain later, and the older sister is just kind of a normal person. The older sister, I think her name is Scarlet. I literally don't remember any of this. Scarlet is the older sister, and she narrates the first book, and I was kind of like, okay, I could keep reading this. It's not great, but she's not detestable. and spends like the whole first book trying to save the younger sister because this younger sister makes jank ass decisions. I'm not going to explain the plot of this book. You have to look it up. I don't remember, and also I don't care. She spends like the whole first book saving her, and then Donatella, spends the next 2 books narrating, and oh my god, she is the dumbest girl like ever. I'm sorry, she's so stupid. Everything she does is her being like, I want to do this thing that is every character is like, maybe don't do that. Because these are the consequences of what could happen there, and that's, like, really bad. So you shouldn't do that. She's like, you guys are so uptight. Like, I'm just gonna do it anyway, because I'm, like, quirky, and you guys don't want to have fun. And she does it, and someone, like, dies because of her. And then she's like, I'm so sorry, I never could have seen this coming. It's like, literally everyone told you. And she does that pattern of things, like, at least 6 times during the course of this series. And I was so annoyed. Also, all the love interests, like, look and act, like, almost exactly the same. Like, they all, like, if you see art of them, they all look the same. Which I know, like, has a reason in the book, but, like, it's a dumb reason. I couldn't deal with it. Also, it has, like, one of my least favorite, like, it's not a trope, it's just a thing that a lot of authors do, where they, instead of establishing a relationship, they're like, oh, they're family, so of course they love each other and would die for each other. I'm not going to put any work into establishing why they feel so close or what makes them, like, so impassioned about how much they care about each other. But they're sisters, so obviously they would die for each other. If I had a younger sister, I'm a younger sibling. If I had a younger sister and she acted like Donatella does, I would not die for her. I would not. She's so dumb. She makes her own mistakes. I warned her. If she died, that would be her problem. If I acted like that to my older sister, I hope she would fucking leave me in the dust. For real. And that's like the whole series. Other than that, there's like very little else redeeming about it. I didn't care about the plot at all. I was just annoyed like the whole time. I will not be reading the sequel series. I don't care how good it is. Caraval was like low-key torture. I don't know why I read all 3 books. I was so determined, and I so could have spent my time doing something else. Sorry for the Caraval fans, man. My heart goes out to you. I don't get it. I do not understand the hype. Okay, these next 3, the last 3, are all books that I didn't finish, for one reason or another. Ooh, okay. This is an unpopular opinion. First, we have Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, which is a YA fantasy series, the first book in a series. I think the 3rd book is coming out this year. This, I have heard exclusively good things about. It has an insanely good, like, average rating on Goodreads. I thought this would be a shoo-in of, like, I would enjoy this. I don't understand why people, like, enjoy this book or this series. I found it just, like, really not well done. The main character, I don't remember her name, like, B or, like, something like that. I don't know. Starts with a B, I think. Her mom died. And she remembers all this, like, weird stuff surrounding her mom's death and doesn't really have an explanation for it. She thinks she just, like, was grieving and, like, in shock. And then it's, like, a year later or something. She's at college. Through a weird series of events, ends up joining this, like, secret society of, like, Arthurian, you know, Arthurian, like, magic, like Merlin and shit, all these, like, groups that are, like, still practicing that, like, kind of magic. And it, like, reminds her of some stuff that happened to her mom or something. I don't know. The point is, the magic system was, like, the plot was, like, not interesting. I, like, didn't care. Anything with, like, trials very rarely, like, works for me. Because it's just, like, this, like, weird incremental bullshit. It was not interesting. The magic, like, I was like, I don't know. Arthurian legends, like, I feel like you could do something cool with that, but it didn't feel new or, like, interesting. I don't know. I wasn't super attached. The main character, I just, like, didn't like or engage with her at all. It seemed like very little of what she did was motivated by, like, her own personality or beliefs, and was, like, almost exclusively motivated by her mother's death, which, like, of course, that's, like, a massive thing to impact her life, but it's just really hard to get a grip on her character, to engage with her character, when I have no sense of what she would be like in the absence of that. You know, she's like, I'll talk to him because of my mom died, and I think he knows something about it. I'll join the society because it reminds me of my mom. I think this will lead me to clues about my mother's death. I'm like, do you do anything because of yourself? Like, do you, is there any moments where I'm like, I feel like she's doing something because that's the kind of person that she is? No. She just felt like a character whose mom had died, and like I couldn't figure out anything else about her, and therefore could not engage with the kind of person she is. I know also, I can't totally speak to this, but it's not the first time I've had this feeling of like, the main character's black, and she's a kind of a primarily white institution, or at least like the people around her at the secret society are mostly white, and I think it's also like in the South. I know a lot of people praised it for like its commentary on racism. I found it very kind of flat and like nothing new. I don't know, heavy-handed. It's similar to how I feel about Babel, where it's like really just kind of outright saying like racism is bad, colonialism is bad, and I'm like, I know, like like the kind of person who doesn't know that and needs to know that is not the kind of person who's going to read this book. You know what I mean? So I was like, I don't know, it just felt all very like not that there's nuance to racism, but it wasn't like presenting racism in any like new way or giving me any perspective on it that I hadn't heard a million times before. I don't know. It felt like it's a very patronizing way of like doing kind of racial commentary. So I was not having it. I DNF'd it. This book's also like over 500 pages long and does not need to be. I really felt like most of it was irrelevant. I think I got like 70% of the way through, and I was like, there's nothing that's keeping me reading this. So I'm really disappointed. I know that a lot of people love it, and I wish I did too, but I really did not. And this is the only book on the worst list that I actually have a copy of, because I have a beautiful copy of it. It's the Waterstone Special Edition, and I just can't bear to get rid of it because it's one of my favorite editions that I have. I think it's so gorgeous. I have read, or tried to read, and not finished this book, like, genuinely 3 times. I think I've finally given up on it, for good. I've read a whole bunch of T.J. Klune books now. I also read The Extraordinaries and The House in the Cerulean Sea. I think his writing just does not work for me, because it's really, like, always comes off very obnoxious. I don't like the characters. House in the Cerulean Sea was fine. The Extraordinaries genuinely could have ended up on this list, because it was, like, so hard to read. Every time I'm, like, just cringing. It's like this human kid whose, like, father left when he was young kind of finds himself, like, partially adopted. His mother's still around, but, like, he becomes very close with this family, and they turn out to be, like, a werewolf family, and he gets this, like, close relationship with one of the, like, younger sons, like, very young when he meets him. That's one thing about this, is that they go on when they're, like, adults to have a romantic relationship. I just think it's weird, because Ox, the main character, meets the love interest, who's a werewolf, when Ox is, like, 14, and the kid is, like, 6. And, like, grows up with him, and is, like, significantly older than him, and then they meet again when, like, the werewolf kid is, like, 17 or 18, and Ox is, like, in his mid-20s. And I was just like, I don't like romance where it's, like, one of them is, like, significantly older than the other, and they meet as children, because it's like, do you not always see that person as, like, a 6-year-old? I don't know. I don't get it. That part's weird to me. There's, like, this very specific way that, like, the werewolves communicate between each other, where they just, like, repeat words. It's like, pack, 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 family, family, family. I find it so obnoxious. I could not get past it. There are some, like, kind of interesting characters. Like, there's a guy who works in the motor shop who's, like, a sorcerer or something that could have been interesting, but I couldn't get past all the other stuff. Again, this book is, like, 500 pages. It does not need to be. It really doesn't. I'm not opposed to long books. A lot of my favorite books are long books. Blood Over Brighthaven, I mean, that's a very long book. I read A Little Life recently. I just got a copy. I did like it. Spoiler. And that's, like, 800 pages. I like long books.
I couldn't stick this out. It was so, like, repulsive. I was like, ugh. If I ever find myself, like, dreading going back to reading a book, I really just should drop it. Like, I can't be doing that. If a book makes me question if I like reading, I need to put it down. And this was unfortunately one of those. I'll still probably keep this because this copy's so pretty. Why do you have to suck? Found family, queer found family fantasy, urban fantasy. Like, I should have loved it, and I didn't. Sorry. Last one. We've come to the end. It's kind of a silly one. The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Like, the premise of this is that, like, a young boy's father, in, like, I think they're in Barcelona or something like that, sometime in the 20th century, I don't remember when, his father takes him to this, like, secret, like, magical bookstore or something, and he's, like, he's, like, told that he will find a book that will, like, define his life, or, like, that he'll become attached to, and he picks this book called The Shadow of the Wind. As he grows up, becomes very curious about this book. It was, like, there's not a lot of other copies, and there's this guy going around burning copies. Like, so he keeps finding sellers who were like, yeah, I have that book, but this guy bought it, and then he burned it. And there's only a few copies of this book in the world, because it was, like, very unsuccessful, and the author had this whole, like, history and stuff. And also, there's a character in The Shadow of the Wind who, like, resembles, or, like, acts like, or has the same name as the guy who keeps going around burning it. So it's kind of, like, story within a story. Sounds very cool. Like, the first few pages, I kind of really liked the writing, and I was, like, in it. But it's just, like, one of the main characters is this, like, weird, creepy old guy that the main character is friends with for some reason. And this weird, creepy old guy is only there to make, like, fart jokes and, like, misogyny jokes. And he's on, like, every page, and I just could not deal with it. Like, I was like... Maybe my tolerance is just low, but every time I was like, why do you think you have to pace out your, like, beautiful writing and, like, interesting story with just, like, misogyny and fart jokes? Like, it was so annoying to me. And another thing about the misogyny in this book, it seems like every female character, including very peripheral ones, is described as having some, like, horrible history of abuse or, like, sexual trauma. Like no woman, like, escapes unscathed from this. And it was just, like, I just read the Vulture article on Neil Gaiman, like, a few days ago. If you don't know, he is allegedly, like, horribly, like, abused and assaulted a bunch of women. And there's a line in the article where they're like, his books were filled with violence and torture and assault towards women, but we all assumed it was from a place of empathy. And that's kind of how I feel about this, where I'm like, it's just, when you have a book so filled with, like, hatred and violence towards women, even if you portray it as, like, look what women go through, it's like, what is your, like, obsession with depicting women suffering? You know, like, there's, like, a thing there. I think it's weird. So I wasn't that comfortable with it, and I just put it down, because I didn't want to deal with it. Yeah. It's all over. 2024. What a year. What a year. There's, like, a million more books I could talk about that I liked or didn't like. This is just, like, a small selection. I mean, you think... I don't know how many books I'd probably, like, around 27 to 30 books I talked about here, maybe a little less. That's, like, 10% of what I read, which is crazy, but also, like, very hard to make the selections of what to put in this video. There's tons more that I loved, honestly. I would say there's a reason why the worst books was the smallest list on this, and the rest were all books that I really enjoyed. I do mostly enjoy the books that I read, and I look forward to reading, and I love reading, and I find a lot of good stuff. Always down for recommendations, as I said at the beginning. If you want to see my process as I'm reading, or look at every book that I read this year, I think my Goodreads is linked in my Instagram bio. I also have Storygraph. I don't think that's linked. You can maybe ask me for it. Maybe I'll put a link too. I'm going to link this video there as well, so you can keep up with, like, what I'm reading and ratings and stuff. I think 2025 is hopefully going to be a very good year. There's a lot of very exciting releases that I haven't read yet. Some I have early copies of. I got a lot of early copies. I'm extremely lucky in that sense. Even so far, I'm filming this on January 19th, and I've already read, like, tons of really amazing things. And some duds, but, you know, I don't think I read anything that I, like, hated yet this year. So, we're off to a solid start. And I have a big list of things I want to read. So I'm always have things in store. I guess, I don't know if I want to make more videos. This was very fun to make. It was also very time consuming. I don't think I could make this during the school year. Maybe. I have some ideas for other things I could talk about. All-time favorites. I mean, only mentioning things from this year is really hard. Because I read so many amazing things in 2023 that I never made a video of or anything and haven't gotten to talk about. Hopefully, at the very least, I'll see you next year at the end of 2025 to talk about books, if not before then. Or you could just track me down and ask me or DM me about anything. I can probably give you recommendations in pretty much any area. Hope you enjoy. If you made it here and actually watched the whole thing, that's fucking crazy. That's wild. But, you know, if you only watched a part, I'm also happy. I hope you found something new, or I convinced you to read something that you'd already heard about, because that's what I'm here for. Thanks. Goodbye. See you in maybe a year.